Hi everybody, David Lindstedt here, and we're going to talk about organizational resilience, and we're going to talk about navigating the strangeness of organizational resilience. And organizational resilience is a strange thing. It's fraught with tensions and paradoxes, and the one I'm really going to focus on today is going to be letting go of control, which is going to be very, very difficult, I think, for the senior leaders and other leaders who are going to have to work to build the capabilities of organizational resilience in the first place. So if I can get buttons to work, this is going to be based on research that I did for the book Building Resilient Organizations Through Change, Chance, and Complexity. So let's begin and see what strangeness we can get into. What I want to talk about first is that rocks aren't resilient, and this is going to matter for a number of reasons, oddly enough. Particularly in America, we have a lot of the ideal leader, the ideal, particularly man image as being unchanging, as being stoic, as being like a rock. This is the advertisement, particularly in the late 90s, for the Silverado truck. But rocks aren't resilient. Rocks are solid, they're strong, they're unaffected, they're unchanging, they're unmoving. They simply withstand whatever is thrown at them, or they don't. They shatter or they wear down. So if rocks aren't resilient, what is resilience? And in fact, this is part of why I wrote the book in the first place. There's very little understanding about resilience. So let's talk about that. So where the heck did this term come from? Really, so this is the Google Books Ngram viewer that shows the usage of words over time. And we can see that we don't really get any talk of resilience until after the publication of The Origin of Species in 1859. And so we have a lot of talk then about natural selection, which eventually then brings us to talk about, if there are some species that get weeded out, there are some species that survive, and that gets us through natural selection, and that gets us through a resilient species, a resilient organism. But boy, it's not until the 2000s, until incredibly recently, and of course with COVID, that the term resilience gets used much at all. This is a very new word. This is a very new concept. And look, just to put a very fine point on this, Stephanie Duchek's research paper in 2019 says this very clearly. Look, there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of discussion now about organizational resilience, but there is very little research, there is very little consensus. And so to introduce a little bit of controversy, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, one of the opening pages of Risk Proof, which I assume is a pun, proof of risk, not that we would ever possibly be risk-proof, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. But they say, while the concept of resilience and its importance is well understood, ... Well, its importance might be, but the concept clearly is not. And that's part, again, why I wrote the book on this. I don't think we have a clear concept of resilience because I think we keep coming back to, and again, I'll go back to this, grit and determination. And in fact, as we look at some aspects, portions of risk proof, this framework does a nice job in many respects, but it often slides back into talk about the ability to quickly bounce back. That's not going to be resilience. Grit, yes, that's the one I wanted. Grit and determination and being strong like the rock. But that's not really what we learn about resilience. Okay, well then, what is resilience? So we talk about resilience, and again, I think it's quite clear that the term has some connection with the talk of natural selection and the work of Charles Darwin, again, in the 1859. So when we think about resilience, what kinds of things are resilient? Rocks aren't resilient. They just sit there and they either withstand or they don't. They shatter, they wear away, they can't adapt. We don't talk about resilient rocks. We don't hold up rocks as our gold standard of what it means to be resilience. What things are resilient? Well, again, organisms, species, ecosystems, all sorts of kinds of systems, right? There's pretty good research, initial research, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, into non-linear systems, systems that have feedback in themselves, systems that are iterative and non-linear and chaotic, organizations. Right? I think when we look at organizations that have adapted or not, survived, maybe or not, there's some intricacies there as well. Teams, look, so let's make this really simple, right? One of the easy examples of resilience are sports teams, or maybe military teams, all sorts of different kinds of teams can overcome, can adapt, can change, can accept losses and move on in different ways. And individuals, and I'm not going to go into individuals because I think there are some significant differences between what makes an individual resilient. But again, we can think in some terms of someone who has overcome great odds, someone who has been able to change, to adapt. One of the stories that I like, and so in the book there are several examples of resilience and what that means, particularly as we all went through a very big global crisis together of COVID. And I think we learned quite a lot from COVID about resilience and business continuity and risk management and what worked and what didn't work. This is a New York Times article on the Afghanistan national soccer team back in 2021, and if this works right. So basically, this team lost so many of its players because of the wars and the struggles in Afghanistan, the problems, and then, of course, COVID. The captain, as well as some of the other players, as well as some of the other participants, have had to do tremendously different and difficult things in order to continue this, for this team to continue and to play. And so the story is about what they had to do in order to have a friendly game in Indonesia, which they did win in the last few minutes of the game. What it took to do that. Not the same team, not the same players, not the same strategies, not the same, and indeed, Afghanistan is, I would think this team is an example of resilience, but it's not particularly successful in some terms and in some ways of thinking about them. So it's not just success. And one of the things we see time and time again in looking at resilient organizations, it's not the ones that are successful. You can be successful, an organization can be successful, particularly for a short period of time, for any number of reasons. And again, when we look at the most successful organizations of any decade, within 2 decades, some huge percentage of them are gone. this is going to increase, of course, in an incredibly increasing VUCA world, which we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Now, this is not a link about success, and it's not even a link about survival. Well, what the heck is it then? So I've got a couple of definitions here. The working definition that we can use for today, that I've used in the introduction to the book, is evolving to flourish in the face of dramatic change. I've got a more academic definition here because I want you all to know that yes, we can come up with it, and it can be complex and capture some of the nuances here. But resilience is about accepting loss. Resilience is about change. Resilience is about, to some extent, successful change, but not necessarily monetary success. There are other types of success as well, but it's about adapting. But it's about somehow the ability, and surprisingly, so many organizations did this during COVID, of taking the situation and evolving, changing, adapting to what has come of it. So for now, for the moment, it's an evolving. It's a new way of becoming. Now, put all that aside for a moment and let's talk about something else. I want to talk, because eventually what I want to talk about is control, and how executives, leaders, senior leaders in organizations at time of great change are going to have to give up control in certain ways, and that's going to be very challenging. And that's going to be what it means in part to be resilient. But let me give you this story first. This is an amalgam of different startups and different small companies, right? Most of the time now we're dealing, when we're doing our enterprise risk management, we're doing organizational resilience, we're dealing with these large multinational corporations, but they all got their start somewhere. And I want to talk about that for just a minute. So let's take a typical startup, right? So you have one or two or three founders. They have an idea, they start down a path, and if they're good at it, they're lean, they're doing lots of experiments, they're seeing what is working, they're seeing what isn't working, they are pivoting, they're changing based on what they're learning from their customers and the marketplace. And now they're growing a little bit more, right? So now maybe they have a chief financial officer and a chief operating officer and a president. And now maybe they need an executive assistant or they need a project manager. And so still, they're all involved together. They're all sharing the same conversations. They're all pivoting at the same time. They understand why there needs to be change. They understand why product X hasn't done as well as product Y, and we need to move over to a new product and see what that market looks like and see how we explore that. Now, if they're successful, now we're into a growing phase. And now we've got lots of different people, and we've got frontline workers, and we've got managers, and we have directors, and we have maybe the beginnings of some silos, some verticals. And the executives, the founders, are starting to ask the questions, why doesn't everyone understand what we're trying to do? Why aren't people able to make decisions on their own? Why aren't they acting like we want them to act? Well, the answer, of course, is that you're used to working with a small set of people and sharing all of that information. Everyone knows what's going on, and now you've outstripped that ability. So now what? Well, now you're coming up with cultural guides. You're coming up with vision and mission statements. You're coming up with codes of conduct and operational procedures and standard operating procedures. And now it really is a matter of, oh, goodness, I have to control what's going on here. People can't just do whatever. They need to understand how to act, who we are, what are our products. Now, we have lots and lots and lots of people in verticals and in silos and in specializations, and the control becomes even harder. But we have to do this. We want to be efficient. We want to make sure that that our brand is the right way, and that we're being represented, and people are talking on social media in the right way. And all this involves a lot of control. We get to the point where we have deviation, and deviation is a bad thing. Doing things outside of the lines, outside of the guardrails, outside of the guidelines, the standard operating procedures, that's bad. We need people to act within these efficient and effective controls. And so scaling the organization becomes one of a desperate attempt for control, so that we have these efficiencies, that we have these standardizations. We're doing Six Sigma. We're getting rid of the inefficiencies and the bloat, making sure that we're lean and keeping all of this. And all that works to a point, and then it doesn't. Because when we come to a situation where an established organization has a status quo, at times of great change, at great uncertainty, great unknown, control is the opposite. A certain kind of control is the opposite of what is needed. Why is that? A couple of quick concepts here, and we don't have any time to go into the KFAN sense-making framework. Hopefully, mostly you know this, and if you don't, it's pretty straightforward, at least at first blush. Which is to say that, look, most of our days are spent in the clear part of this framework. What does that mean? Well, things are predictable, right? I know how to send an email. I know how to respond to a question. I know how to brush my teeth. I know how to drive my car. I know how to balance a spreadsheet. These things are clear. Sometimes I don't even have to think about them. Most of the things that happen are in this. And look, in the clear domain, because things are predictable, they have to be efficient. Deviation is a bad thing. Variance is a bad thing. Going away from the status quo is a bad thing. It becomes very inefficient. It becomes antithetical maybe to the brand, to the marketing, these things. As things start to move away from that and life gets a little more complicated, then the answers aren't clear. The ways of doing things aren't necessarily clear to the layperson, but an expert will know what to do. So if there's a cybersecurity incident, right? Not everybody knows how to fix the cybersecurity incident, but there are some people who know how to go in and do the forensics and do the cleanup and find out what happened and get rid of the denial of service attack, whatever these things are. And again, I'm not going to go into this I just want to give you a very high level piece here. But as things get even more complex, as the problems begin to mount, as there are cascading effects, as, again, so something like COVID, or go back a bit, Hurricane Katrina, the Christchurch earthquakes, the Fukushima reactor, we do have some research from these historical events. And again, what we see then is as things become complex or chaotic, everything changes. We're talking about dynamic, nonlinear systems. And when these systems move from clear or complicated into the complex and chaotic, you have to deal with them differently. Because the kinds of strategies that work in clear and complicated environments make things worse in complex and chaotic environments. So this is to say, the kinds of, do I have a picture for this? Yes, okay, I do have a picture of this. What got you here won't get you there. So this is good to great. There are other analogies we have that don't have to do with disasters and interruptions and great uncertainty. But what the kinds of things, and this is why when we talk about like a rock, when we talk about grit and determination and sticking with it and sticking with your guns, that is completely wrong in a complex, chaotic environment. We have to do something different. If we didn't have to do something different, we'd be in a clear or complicated environment. So we have to change. We have to do something different. We have to evolve. and move on to something else, because what got you here is not going to get you beyond to the next thing. At times of great disruption, at times of great change, we have to do something different. Now, let me give you one more concept here. So we just talked about KFAN. Let's talk about Antifragile. So this is Nicholas Taleb's work. This comes from his fourth book. His big book, his second book, was The Black Swan. In The Black Swan, he introduces the problem of, hey, wow, there's all these really big changing events that happen, and he outlines that. But then you have the question of, how do I deal with that? And to some extent, his answer is in the fourth book, which is Antifragile. And we don't have a lot of time to go into this, but let's go into it briefly, which is to say, look, different systems, different entities, different functions are set up to do different things. Most of what we have operates in the clear environment where everything is, well, clear. And most of the things there are going to be fragile. We don't want mistakes. We don't want change. We don't want black swan events. We like tranquility. We like predictability. We like our guardrails to be just what they are. Well, one of the ways we protect ourselves then are to create things that are robust. So what is a robust thing? Well, these are something that helps us absorb shock and get back to the way things were. I'm going to argue, well, I have argued other places, these are things like risk management and cybersecurity and business continuity. These are things that absorb shock and get us back, because we like back. We like predictable. We like status quo. We like to know exactly what's going on. And so we have robust entities that make sure that we can absorb some amount of shock. But at some point in the environment, the situation will change, and we will not be able to go back. We will have to go and do something different, or we will simply not survive. So again, this is a good example from Hurricane Katrina, the Christchurch earthquakes, from COVID. We had to do different things, or we weren't going to be able. So the kinds of plans we could have created going into COVID would not have captured either the problems or the solutions that were necessary in order to thrive in COVID. And to some extent, thrive we did. And we can look at the numbers, we can look at the Wall Street numbers and how many organizations not simply survived, but also thrived in this change. But the kinds of options available to us, for example, doing court cases by Zoom was simply not allowed. But during COVID, then it was. Offering healthcare over the phone was not allowed, but telehealth then was allowed after COVID and became very successful in a number of areas. So anti-fragile entities, organizations, systems are those that benefit from change, that black swan events become beneficial. And you have to have, and this is where one of the, what I talked about in a previous session, for the Risk Awareness Week, this is where you have quite a tension, because you need to have portions of the organization, I would argue large portions of the organization, that are efficient, that are probably fragile, that are operating within the status quo. But you absolutely have to, and the robust pieces that protect that, but you absolutely have to have capabilities that are anti-fragile, that are going to be able to let you evolve into other things. And so here we can see, I'll move quickly because we're beginning to run out of time a little bit. So depending on the degree of change, depending on the degree of disruption, depending on the degree of uncertainty that is happening, and the duration of that, and the distance that is both literal and metaphoric, of the change, and the loss, the impact, the complexity of that change, well, we're either going to simply absorb it and it's just regular operations. We have some variance, we have some deviations, we have Bob who doesn't show up until 10 o'clock in the morning on Mondays. Okay, we deal with it, it's not a big deal. As it gets a little bit more of a shock, then we're going to have to use our robust entities to absorb that shock, but we're going to fail back and we're going to get back to the way things were. But as we outstrip those capabilities, as the degree of change, complexity, duration, and distance increase, we will not be able to do that. We could not simply fail back in COVID. We had to do different things in order to flourish. In order to adapt, in order to take advantage of the opportunities. And so that means, and I don't like fail forward, but for now, fail forward. But it means evolving, it means changing, it means pivoting, it means somehow accepting the loss that is with us and being able to move on to something else. I won't go into this now, we don't have time, but again, this lines up nicely with other models of resilience that are just coming to the fore now. And we can talk about fragile, robust, and anti-fragile. We can talk about clear, complicated, complex, and chaotic. We can talk about heuristics versus improvisation, coping versus adaptation. This falls nicely into the way that we're starting to learn about resilience. All right, I talked about this. All right, all of that is to get us to, okay, well, we know that we think we want to be resilient. You may change your mind a little bit depending on how this plays out, because resilience has quite a cost to it. And resilience is going to mean willingness to give up control in certain areas. So all of that, again, so what I'm going to talk about now, based on the research that I've done here and looking at what is it that if resilience is not about simply withstanding, if resilience is not simply about failing back, if it's not simply about absorbing shock and getting back to the way things were, if it's about an evolving, if it's about changing, pivoting, flourishing, adapting, being flexible, how do you do it? And to me, that's the one of many interesting questions. So part of this has to do with giving up control, and that's not going to be easy at any level. In fact, that goes quite against the ethos of a number of cultures, and I'll say particularly, of course, in America. So it's interesting to go and try and come up with the right words for this. What does it mean to give up control? It means to surrender. Oh, that's bad. That's abandoning, quitting, succumbing, waving, yielding. Oh, these are terrible words. No leader's going to want to do these things. Well, let's try some others. Let's try something like, well, we can emancipate. We could discharge. Well, unleash. That sounds a little bit better. The only point I'm putting here is we already have the cards stacked against us here. In talking about what it means, without getting into something like Wu Wei, the action of inaction, it's going to be difficult right from the very beginning to have the right words to talk about the right things to do in a time of great change. I outlined 14 aspects of organizational resilience. They're not a taxonomy. It's not the end-all, be-all. These are just the capabilities that came up time and time again in my research, in the case studies, in the anecdotes, in the narratives, in the storytelling. These are the items that have come up many, many times. And each one of them is going to require a letting go, an empowering. Let's go all the way back here. Hide your eyes there for a minute. I'm going to go all the way back to the very beginning where I put, where I put the agenda here. And we're going to talk about, and I use, these are the best terms I could come, unleashing capital. That sounds kind of powerful, and liberating, extricating, untying leaders. These are some of the best words I could come up with. But really what we're talking about is just letting go of some control in very specific and nuanced ways. So I'm going to go through these now as we wrap up our presentations. We get to the very last portions of the presentation. And I'm going to talk about capital, crews, experimentation, and leadership, because each one of these requires action and requires capabilities, and it requires building capabilities now. You can't just turn these things on at time of great change. These have to exist, and the leaders are going to have to build these capabilities. But part of the building is not like what you did for a startup. As you scaled that startup, as you put all of these measures of control into place to guide, to make sure that there is no deviance, to make sure that there is no variation or minimize variation, make sure everything's efficient and effective. Well, resilience is not efficient and effective. It's effective, it is not efficient. Resilience involves experimentation. It involves messiness. It involves a lot of gray areas, and not only are the solutions unknown at the beginning, even the problem is unknown at the beginning. And if you think back to the first few months of COVID, you'll know this to be true. It's easy to sit back now and look back at COVID and say, oh, we knew it was going to be this. We knew we had to work from home. We knew we had to do these kinds of things. We knew we had to do more. But we didn't know that going in. We didn't know what the problems were. Were people going to come out? Would they go to restaurants? Would they be willing to do telehealth and telecommuting? Would the the cities allow restaurants to build seating out in the streets and keep that out there? New York City has that question right now about what they're going to do with that kind of seating. So let's go into, I'm going to go through these 4 items, these 4 categories of resilience. And obviously we don't have a lot of time, so I'll go through them somewhat quickly. All right. Capital. I start with capital because I'm thinking it's going to be that which you'll agree to most readily. When I say, hey, it turns out that organizations that have a lot of money to throw at the problem fare better and are more resilient than those who aren't, you'll probably be like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When I talk about relationships, trust, when I talk about information, organizations that have more resources, relationships, information are going to be better suited for resilience. But it's not quite that clear. Now, what's interesting in the research, and I'm not having a lot of fancy slides here, so we're just going to talk at this point. What's interesting in the research, particularly from the 2006 to 2008 Great Recession, the economic downturn, what the research showed was the most successful companies did 2 things. Well, 3 things really, in terms of capital. One is they spent more. So instead of tightening the belt and just spending less and spending less and spending less, they actually outspent their competitors. So part of what it's going to take to be a resilient organization is you're going to have capital and assets and resources, and you're going to have to spend it when at times you think it might be best to keep it close to the vest and keep tighten the belt. But you'll need to spend it. Second, you'll need to shift it around. What got you here won't get you there. The status quo cannot hold anymore to be resilient, to take advantage of change, to take advantage of new opportunities. You're going to have to do something different. And that means shifting money, assets, investments, people around. And that is not going to be very popular. You can well imagine that each of the directors and vice presidents and managers in each of their silos have fought very hard to get the people they have, to get the capital they have, the money they have, the investments they have. They are not going to want to give that up, even if it's for the good of the company. So what? That doesn't help me and my department. Well, that's going to be what has to happen. We're going to have to move money around from the things that aren't working anymore to the things that might be working. How do we know? We'll get to that in a moment. But we're going to have to reallocate, redistribute resources around, and that's going to be very difficult, and that's going to significantly interrupt and disrupt the status quo. The third thing they do is they also, and this might seem odd, but here's one of the tensions that we see again throughout organizational resilience, paradoxes and tensions. They also become more efficient in some areas. So the things that you're going to continue to do, you need to be more efficient at doing them. Why? Because you need to take that money, that capital, those assets, and move them somewhere else. So the things that you keep doing, do them better, faster, more efficiently, and move that money somewhere else. And now we have, again, another paradox. We need to spend more money but save more money. We need to do more things but do fewer things. We need to be more fragile but also more anti-fragile. It's a very delicate balance here. And again, this is what's so important about the topic. I don't think it's at all clear that resilience is a straightforward concept, that resilience can simply be purchased, that if we simply get more risk managers and cybersecurity experts and business continuity planners, that will make us more resilient. Not at all. All right, in the interest of time, moving on. Part of the resources then also, as far as capital goes, is relationships. We have to have all sorts of relationships inside and outside of the organization. And what that means is we're going to, as an organization, have to actually encourage people to form relationships outside of work. Volunteer organizations and other organizations, and learning and going to different places and weak tie networks and strong tie networks, because the relationships, this is pretty common sense. At time of trouble, you rely very heavily on those partners, those peoples that you trust, and you've got to build that trust up ahead of time. You can't simply call that in at time of disaster without having already built it up. So these relationships inside the organization, outside of the organization, in volunteer organizations, in kids club. So again, this is going to mean letting your employees have more time to do things outside of work. They have, and this is going to make bottom line financial dollars and cents matter importance. You've got to let the people in your organization develop relationships outside of the organization if you want to be able to leverage them in times of great change. And then information. Information is absolutely key. And we're going to talk about experimentation here in a minute. But you have got to have an organization with people who are gathering information from the fringes, from other points of view, from diverse sources, from different perspectives and backgrounds and experiences. It is very unclear at the beginning of great change what's going on, let alone what is the solution. And what we need to do is we're going to need to gather lots of information from all different kinds of sources here. And so we can't just keep our contacts with inside of our organization. We can't all drink the same Kool-Aid and have yes men. The research shows that you've got to have different ideas, different perspectives, different opinions, and different information that comes from the fringe, that comes from weak and strong tie networks, from different people and different places, in order to come up with the kinds of solutions you're going to need. One of the things that I came up with that I never even thought I was going to look into is the idea of crews. That is the idea of, hey, let's put a crew together to do this thing. One of the things I've seen time and time again in the research, in the cases, in the stories, the anecdotes, is we didn't establish teams with a charter and with their hierarchical rankings and with an oversight committee to get things done in times of great change, in times of COVID, for Hurricane Katrina. We have individuals that come together from different parts of the organization. They're not They don't come together by title. They don't come together by value structure. They come together because these are the right people to solve certain problems. They come together, they solve problems, and they dissolve. They're not teams in that sense. They're crews. An example is at the at healthcare facilities. At the beginning of COVID, you had a number of problems about how to treat people and where to treat people. Well, how are you going to figure these things out? Well, you bring in not only doctors and nurses, but also HR and legal and the cleaning staff and maybe a community representative. This isn't an official team. It's not hierarchical. These aren't the same levels, and there's just the directors and directors coming together. These are people coming together to think of new ways to do something, to come up with new solutions. They're self-organizing. They're self-directing. They're worried. The things that they're going to talk about on any given day or any given hour are going to change over time because they're going to be flexible. They're going to be adaptable, and they're going to be outside of the status quo. They have to interrupt the status quo to move money around, to move resources around, to share ideas, to restructure lines of service. So we talk about entrepreneurs. These are people who are going to be looking out to different kinds of businesses, different products, different services, different marketplaces. And that's going to mean change inside of the organization to be able to account for those things. We talk about intrapreneurs. These are people inside the organization that say, hey, this isn't the best way you could do this. We could do something different. We could do something better. We could shift things around. The status quo isn't necessarily the best way that we're going to do these types of things, particularly at times of great change and disruption. And contrarians. If the status quo is not going to save us, if the clear environment becomes chaotic or complex, we've got to have people that think in different ways. We've got to have contrarians. These are people who are not going to be popular, that may save the very life of the organization. They're going to come up with new ideas, new ways of thinking, change, accepting the losses, maybe accepting changes, maybe getting rid of entire divisions, products, lines of services, projects. That's not going to go over well with a number of people that are in that status quo. But if you don't have these ideas, you're stuck. You have got to embrace the losses. You have got to get to the change. And that's going to get you into a culture. You have to build aspects of your culture. Not everyone, not everywhere. And here again, we see another tension, which is we can't build an entire organization of iconoclasts and contrarians. Maybe you can. I think you can build teams like that. I think you can build sections like that. And I certainly think there are aspects of the culture that you need to prepare ahead of time. You need to have these competencies. And here again, how many, how far, well, I think a lot of that's going to depend on your marketplace, your business, the amount of change that's coming. But we have to get ready to have these bits of our culture to make experiments, an experimental culture. At time of great change, again, we don't know what's going on. We also don't know how to solve it. We have to do experiments, small, thoughtful, parallel experiments. Again, at COVID, will people come to restaurants? Will they come out of their houses? Will they buy this? Will they buy that? Will they come for this service? Will they be willing to Zoom in to a doctor? We don't know. We don't even know. Will kids be home? Will they not be home? How will we school them? What does that mean? How do I take care of my aging parents? How do I go? All of these unknown. We don't even know what's going on, let alone how to solve it. What do we do? Well, we conduct experiments. We see what works, and what works one month might not work the next. People might not be willing to call in for telehealth in the first few months, but boy, after 6 or 8 months, yeah, they probably will, because they have problems that are going to need to fix. So we need to do experiments. And as we talked about in the last, these people who think differently, the people who think outside of the status quo, we need to have dissimilar individuals, different backgrounds, different perspectives, different ideas. We need to have red teaming, where we purposefully challenge the status quo. There are always better ways to do something, particularly as change goes on throughout the world and the marketplace and the consumers and the stakeholders and the stockholders. And we need to really seek reality. One of the clear things that comes out in the research is that those organizations that are willing to embrace the reality of the loss and adapt to it are going to be more resilient and more adaptable to what's going on, and ultimately, arguably, more profitable, more survivable, more successful. They'll flourish. So we've got to acknowledge the reality, want to know the reality. This is very challenging. This is not comfortable stuff. It's not a comfortable environment to have somebody in your team, and I'll say team here, that is the designated person to come up with a contrarian, devil's advocate point of view. It's not comfortable having people that think differently with different expectations and backgrounds. You know, the easiest example, contrite, are the generations. So, you know, the millennials and Gen Z, Gen X, the boomers, different ways of thinking, different expectations, different backgrounds. But you better have those at the table if you want to come up with real solutions to real problems. And we have to be safe to fail. We can't run experiments that are all going to be successful. Many of them are going to fail, but we learn something very important. This is part of the lean and entrepreneurial culture that we have. That I may bring a product to market, but if I've done it at low cost with low risk and it fails, well, I've learned something quite valuable there. If I get punished for that kind of failure, I'm not going to bring that kind of information back to the organization. And leaders, boy, in the complex environment, in a time of great change and uncertainty, leaders are going to have to be even better at focusing on purpose. And in many ways, the Great Resignation was quite predictable. The research was there from the Christchurch earthquakes. In a prolonged disaster environment, particularly, at any one time, somewhere between 40 and 60% of people are thinking of leaving their organization. Why is that? Well, some were dissatisfied before the disaster, but many were not. It is a time of reflection, of challenge. And if people don't feel that they were listened to, that they were respected, that they were valued for the extra effort that they put in a difficult situation, they don't want to stay. They don't want to contribute. They don't want to keep going above and beyond. Leaders have got to show the purpose, the value of the work that's being done here. They've got to care. This is something we don't talk about very often, but boy, when you start reading your McKinsey and Company articles of the last several months, and I guarantee of the next coming months, your Inc. articles, your New York Times, whatever, your business articles, I guarantee are going to continue to say, wow, it's important to care about your employees. Sorry, but you'll have to have some empathy for them. You'll have to use some soft skills. You'll have to find real purpose for the work that they're doing and real value for them. You're going to have to be situational, which is to say at least that you have to know when you've moved from a clear environment where it is very proper for you to give order and direction, very proper to get rid of variance and deviation, and when we've switched into a complex situation, and now I need to let go. Now I need to empower. Now I need to have a really do my best to have my teams, my departments, my divisions, my silos look for the reality of the situation, launch experiments, think differently, be contrarian, think of new opportunities inside and outside of the organization, to move assets around, to leverage relationships that aren't simply within my silo, that go across the organization and outside of the organization. Get information. What are you doing? What are they doing? Did it work? Did it not work? What are customers doing? And bring in that information. Leverage those relationships. Move the assets and the resources around to things that are working, away from things that aren't working anymore. So, this is a time of change. It is a time of letting go. The leaders, and I mean this writ large, anybody who is a leader that can in any way influence, at these times, in these situations, we have to be very mindful about empowering, caring, being situational, adjusting our leadership styles to meet the realities of what's going on in the situation. It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be a time of now, well, I can't simply buy resilience. I can't simply get another risk manager and business continuity person, another cybersecurity expert, and simply buy my way into resilience. And quite frankly, I can't even predict what the change is going to be. What are the disruptors? What are the big items of change? How is what are we even going to, what mergers and acquisitions are we going to have that are going to change our culture? And yet I have to do something to prepare for these things. I don't want to go in unprepared and blind and unready. And so the answer here is we've got to develop, I'll go back, well, I won't go back. We've got to develop these capabilities, and it won't be simple. We're going to be in a unpredictable, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. How do we prepare for that? Not by trying to look in the crystal ball and figuring out exactly what each thing is that's going to happen to us. And not by continuing to invest only in the robust entities that absorb shock and bring us back and bring us back and bring us back. We have got to invest in the capabilities to be more resilient. So let me try and wrap this up. Let me go back to the very beginning. I think it's not quite clear, particularly if you haven't looked deeply into the nature of resilience, what organizational resilience is all about. And I think, and again, let's be a little controversial and let's look at the risk proof. It's interesting because there's so much of it is right. There's so much about empowering, a focus on people, a focus on culture, the idea that change and flexibility and adaptability are so important. But often it slides back into talking about bouncing back, talking about in the communication section about business continuity and the need for business continuity. It's going to be difficult to get our arms around the real nature of resilience. But that nature is going to be, and I'll go back one last slide. Avert your eyes. I'll go back to this slide of definitions. My goodness gracious. Okay, let's go to this. Resilience is going to be about really coming to grips with the reality and a changing reality of VUCA world, of unpredictableness. It's going to mean change, and it's going to mean changes, dramatic changes within the system, and that's going to mean evolution, and evolution is going to mean potentially flourishing. We're not going to flourish with the status quo. That's just not how life works. We're going to need to build in the capabilities to evolve in the face of great change if we're going to take advantage of the opportunities that it provides. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope this was helpful. Let me put this up one last time. Boy, your eyes probably hurt now from all of these changes of the slides. Here's here's how to get a hold of me if you need me. The book is available as well, of course, Building Resilient Organizations. Thank you all. I hope it was worth your time. Oh, and thanks to Risk Awareness Week as well. Bye, everybody.